The screen glared back at me, call failed. Again, 1% battery, 1% My fingers were numb, partly from the cold seeping through the thin cabin walls, mostly from pure, unadulterated terror. I'd been trying for, God, how long, felt like hours. Just trying to dial those three simple numbers, 911, but nothing. My heart basically tried to punch its way out of my chest. I swear I tasted copper, that metallic tang of pure panic flooding my mouth. I scrambled backwards on the rough wooden floor, crab walking away from the door, my eyes glued to the thick bolted wood. The sound hadn't just been loud, it felt solid, heavy. Like whatever hit it had serious weight behind it, serious intent. My breath hitched, coming in ragged, shallow gasps that sounded way too loud in the suffocating silence that followed the bang. It seems crazy now, thinking back just, 12 hours ago, pulling up to this place in my beat-up sedan, feeling pleased with myself. The cabin looked exactly like the pictures online, rustic, secluded, maybe a little more rundown than advertised, but charmingly so. Or so I thought then. Nestled deep in the woods, end of a long, winding dirt road. No neighbors for miles. Perfect. The air was crisp, smelled like pine needles and damp earth. The first few hours were fine, honestly. I unpacked, swept the worst of the dust bunnies away, even managed to get a small fire going in the old stone fireplace. It crackled merrily, spitting sparks, pushing back the chill that seemed to cling to the cabin's corners. I made myself some instant coffee, found a slightly lopsided armchair, and actually started reading. It felt normal, peaceful even. The power went out around midnight. 1 second, the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling was casting its weak, yellow glow, the next, pitch blackness. Utter, complete, consuming darkness, broken only by the dying embers in the fireplace. My first thought, the storm. The wind had picked up considerably, howling like a banshee around the eaves, and I could hear the distant rumble of thunder. Old cabin, remote location, probably overhead lines running through miles of trees. Okay, power outage, fine. Storm, fine. Annoying, but I could deal. I decided to check my phone again, maybe see if there were any outage reports online, let someone know I was okay before the battery drained too much. I thumbed the screen alive, and my stomach dropped. Where the signal bars usually were, just nothing, a little X. No service. What? I had 2 bars just minutes ago. How could it drop completely just like that? The storm. Maybe it knocked out the local tower. Possible, I guess. I tried to rationalize. Storms knock out cell towers. Old cabins lose power. It's okay. It's explainable. I sat huddled in the armchair, the pathetic lantern on the floor beside me, casting my own giant distorted shadow on the wall. I must have drifted off, maybe just for a few minutes, exhausted by the adrenaline and the fear. What woke me wasn't loud. It was quiet, persistent, and undeniably close. SCCRR. Drag. SCCRR. The silence after the scratching was almost worse. My ears were ringing, straining to catch the slightest sound. Nothing, just the wind and my own ragged breathing. Okay, Alex, think. Phone's got no signal, but it still has battery. Maybe I can charge it if the power comes back on. Fat chance. What about a power bank? I frantically searched my backpack, my hands clumsy with fear and cold. Yes, found it. A decent-sized one, too. I always carry it for emergencies. Panic is a corrosive thing. It eats away at reason, leaves you thrashing in a sea of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. I forced myself to take deep breaths, fighting the urge to just curl up in a ball and wait for the end. Rationalize, Alex, rationalize. It's the storm. The power lines are down, that's why the power is out and the cell tower is down. Happens. The scratching. A branch. A big one caught in the wind, scraping against the wood. Or a desperate animal seeking shelter from the storm. I couldn't stand it anymore. The not knowing. Was it still out there? Had it moved? Was it right up against the wall, listening to my pacing, my ragged breaths? Against my better judgment, fueled by a desperate need for any information, I decided to risk a look outside. Not the front door, obviously, and not the back window near the generator shed. There was a small window on the side wall, facing deeper into the woods, partially obscured by a tall, dead bush outside. Seeing that figure, real or not, solidified my fear into action. Rationalization was out the window. Survival mode kicked in. I wasn't going outside. Not for the generator, not for anything. Fortify, that was the only option. Stay inside, make it harder to get in. The front door was solid wood, bolted, but the windows, they felt vulnerable, especially the larger one near the fireplace. Adrenaline surged through me, temporarily pushing back the exhaustion. Time crawled. Minutes stretched into an eternity, measured only by the frantic thumping of my own heart and the occasional, terrifyingly loud gust of wind against the cabin. I huddled on the floor, back against the wall furthest from the door and windows, the lantern clutched in my lap like a holy relic. Its light was definitely dimmer now, flickering more erratically. Battery running low there too. Fantastic. Every so often, I'd check my phone. 10% battery. The number glowed ominously on the screen before I quickly turned it off again to conserve power. 10%. It felt like a countdown. The lantern was sputtering badly now, casting wild, elongated shadows that writhed like snakes on the walls. Sometimes it would almost go out completely, plunging me into near-total darkness for a heart-stopping second before flickering back to life, weaker than before. My nerves were absolutely shredded. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy as a shroud. After the tapping, the quiet felt unnatural, deliberate. Was it gone? Had it given up? Or was it just changing tactics? My mind, raw with fear and exhaustion, conjured horrific possibilities in the oppressive darkness. Maybe it could get in silently, through the chimney, under the floorboards. Was it already inside, hiding in the deepest shadows, waiting for the lantern to finally die? Plink, sputter, darkness. The lantern finally gave up the ghost. One last defiant flicker and then, nothing, pitch black. The kind of absolute, consuming blackness you only find miles away from any civilization, amplified by the lack of moonlight due to the storm. It pressed in on me, heavy and suffocating. I couldn't see my own hands in front of my face. Disorientation hit me hard. Where were the walls, the door, the furniture I'd used as barricades? I was adrift in an ocean of black. Just when I thought the absolute darkness and silence were the peak of the terror, it happened. Jiggle, rattle, rattle, rattle. The sound exploded out of the blackness, shockingly loud, terrifyingly close. The front door handle, it was being turned violently back and forth, shaken with incredible force. Rattle, jiggle, bang. The wood around the handle creaked under the strain. The table I'd wedged there scraped loudly against the floorboards as it was jolted by the force. It wasn't just testing the lock anymore. The rattling stopped. The heavy breathing continued for a moment. A dreadful, wet sound scraping against the other side of the door, then faded slightly as if it had leaned back. But it hadn't gone away. The silence that followed was charged with a terrible anticipation. My ears strained, picking up every tiny creak of the house settling, every distant sigh of the wind. Then a new sound began, quiet at first, slithering through the wood of the door, through the cracks around the frame. A voice. Or. Whispering stopped. Silence crashed back in, absolute and terrifying. The darkness felt complete, impenetrable. My phone, it was the last resort. The final, desperate, probably useless gesture. My fingers, numb and trembling, fumbled for the power button. 1%. The screen glowed faintly, a tiny island of light in the infinite black. 1%. It felt like a cruel joke. Could I even dial 911 before it died? Could I hit send? Would it even matter? No signal. I waited in the blackness, bracing for the inevitable crash, the splintering wood, the roar of the thing breaking through. Seconds stretched into minutes. My body was rigid, every muscle tensed, anticipating the impact. But it didn't come. No more rattling, no more whispering, no heavy breathing, just silence. Profound, unbroken silence except for the wind outside, which seemed to have calmed slightly. Had it gone, given up? I stayed frozen for what felt like forever, staring at the open doorway, the pale gray light spilling onto the dusty floor. My mind struggled to process the anticlimax, the sheer weirdness of it. No attack, just an open door. Slowly, shakily, I pushed myself up. My legs were stiff, trembling. Every instinct screamed at me to run, bolt out that door and into the snow, run until I collapsed. But something made me hesitate. Something felt unfinished, wrong. You ever get that prickly feeling on the back of your neck? Like static electricity, only it's not touching anything. It's just there, like someone flipped a switch inside you labeled danger. I get that sometimes. But the night it really started, the night I first saw him, that wasn't just a prickle. It was an ice-cold jolt straight up my spine. I was sitting up late, just scrolling on my phone in bed, trying to wind down. My breath hitched in my throat. How long had he been there? Minutes? Seconds? Long enough for that icy dread to seep into my bones. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. It felt like my muscles were locked, frozen by the sheer wrongness of what I was seeing. A guy, outside my second-floor window. No ladder, no scaffolding, no conveniently placed tree branch sturdy enough to hold a flea, let alone a grown man. Just him floating, standing on air. And then I blinked, just a single involuntary blink, and he was gone, vanished. 1 second, the impossible figure was dominating my view, a terrifying statue against the night sky. The next, just empty glass reflecting the dim light of my bedside lamp and the vague shapes of my room. My breath came out in a ragged gasp I hadn't realized I was holding. My muscles unlocked all at once, leaving me shaky and weak. Gone, just like that, did I? Did I imagine it? Was I that tired? I spent the next hour trying to convince myself it was nothing. Pacing the small space of my bedroom, then venturing into the living room, checking the front door lock bolted, chain on. Checked the kitchen window lock secure. Everything was as it should be. Secure, safe, except it didn't feel safe anymore. The silence of the apartment, usually comforting, now felt oppressive, heavy. Every tiny creak of the floorboards, every hum from the refrigerator seemed amplified, sinister. I must have drifted off eventually, exhaustion finally winning the battle against fear. But it wasn't restful sleep. It was that horrible, shallow kind where you're half aware, plagued by disjointed, anxious dreams. I kept seeing that silhouette, that tilted head appearing in impossible places, inside my closet, reflected in the bathroom mirror, hovering just above me while I slept. I jolted awake sometime later, heart pounding, convinced I'd heard something. A noise, a faint tapping. I didn't move a muscle. I just watched that small dent in the curtain, my breathing shallow, almost non-existent. It stayed there for what felt like an eternity, maybe 10 seconds, maybe a minute. Just this silent, unnerving pressure against the glass. I imagined a fingertip, cold and pale, resting there. Or maybe it wasn't a finger. My mind conjured shapes, possibilities, none of them comforting. Was he trying to see if the window was locked, testing its strength? Okay, that was it. No more peeking, no more wondering. Ignorance was bliss, right? Or at least maybe ignorance was survival. I yanked the curtains shut again, making sure they overlapped tightly in the middle. I even considered pinning them together, but the thought of getting that close to the window again made my skin crawl. Instead, I barricaded myself. Metaphorically, at least. I turned on every light in the apartment, bedroom, hallway, living room, kitchen, even the bathroom. I think I stayed like that for hours, huddled on the couch, pretending to read, pretending to listen to music, while every nerve ending screamed that I was not alone. The bright lights did nothing to soothe the primal fear gripping me. If anything, they made the ordinary feel threatening. The way the light caught the edge of a picture frame, the way a shadow fell behind the coat rack by the door, everything was suspect. My own home felt alien territory, hostile. And then I heard it again. Faintly at first. So faintly I thought I was imagining it, my fear manifesting auditory hallucinations now. Tap, pause, tap, pause, tap. It wasn't random, it was rhythmic, precise. Coming from the direction of the bedroom, coming from the window. My heart leaped into my throat, choking me. It was louder this time, not aggressive, not like someone trying to break the glass. It was delicate, almost hesitant. Tap, tap, tap. How long did the tapping last? Minutes, an hour, time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing. Each tap felt like an eternity, but the period between them vanished in a heartbeat. Tap, tap, tap. It was methodical, patient, infinitely patient, and that patience was terrifying. It wasn't the frantic scrabbling of something desperate to get in. It was calm, deliberate, like whatever was out there had all the time in the world, and knew I had nowhere to go. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Against every rational survival instinct screaming in my head, I took another step into the room, and then another until I was standing a few feet away from the window. My hand trembled as I reached out towards the edge of the curtain. My fingers brushed the fabric. It felt cold, charged with static energy, or maybe that was just me. I hesitated, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Tap, tap, tap. It started again. Right then, right as my fingers touched the curtain. The tapping became frantic. Tap, 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 tap. It wasn't rhythmic anymore. It was a desperate, rapid drumming against the glass, like something was panicking out there or trying to break through. The sound filled the room, echoing in the confined space, vibrating in my teeth. This wasn't patient observation anymore. This was something else, something urgent. Something had changed. I scrambled to my feet, backing away until my back hit the wall opposite the window. I needed to see. I know it sounds crazy after everything, after backing away in terror, but the not knowing what was causing that frantic noise, that scraping, was somehow worse than facing it. Was he trying to break in? Was he hurt? Was something else out there with him? My fear was still overwhelming, but a sliver of desperate curiosity, or maybe just the need for information, pushed through. I couldn't stay pinned against the wall, waiting for the glass to break or for whatever came next. At first, all I saw was darkness, the familiar hazy orange glow of the streetlights reflecting on the outer surface of the glass. The frantic sound seemed to be coming from slightly above my line of sight through the narrow gap. Where was he? Had he moved? Then something shifted in my peripheral vision within that tiny sliver of view, a pale shape, moving downwards. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, a hand came into view, pressed flat against the glass, fingers splayed wide. I watched that hand, frozen for what felt like hours. It didn't move, didn't twitch, just stayed there, pressed flat, a silent, terrifying sentinel. The rest of the figure remained out of view, obscured by the curtains and the angle. Was he still looking at me, or was his attention elsewhere now? The silence stretched on, becoming almost unbearable. The frantic energy from before was gone, replaced by this heavy, watchful stillness that felt even more sinister. My mind raced. Why the change? My heart hammered against my ribs, following the line of that pointing finger. It wasn't aimed at the closet or the dresser. It was pointing more towards the corner of the room. The corner diagonally opposite the window, the darkest corner, a corner that was mostly empty, just shadows. Deep, thick shadows that the weak light from the hallway didn't quite reach. I stared into that darkness, my eyes straining, trying to make out any shape, any movement. At first, I saw nothing, just blackness. I couldn't breathe. My lungs seized, starved of air, that patch of darkness in the corner. It wasn't static. I could sense it now, a subtle vibration, a low thrumming energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. It felt like condensed hatred, pure ancient malice given formless shape, and it knew I'd seen it. I felt its attention shift, like the focus of a predator locking onto its prey. The cold intensified, sinking into my bones. My teeth started to chatter uncontrollably. The whispering grew louder, coalescing into something almost intelligible. Not words exactly, but intent, hunger, a cold, ancient hunger that had been waiting in the shadows for who knows how long, waiting for someone to notice it, waiting for someone to be vulnerable like me, alone, terrified, focused on the distraction at the window. My eyes darted back to the hand. It was definitely fading now, like smoke dissipating in the wind. I slammed into the doorframe, gasping, fumbling for the knob. My fingers slipped on the cool metal. Behind me, the whispering reached a crescendo, filling my ears, my head, my soul. It wasn't just sound anymore, it was pressure, crushing me from the inside out. I risked a glance back. The darkness filled almost half the room now, a roiling, shapeless mass of utter black, and within it were those faces, pale, screaming faces, twisting and contorting within the void. Or was my mind just breaking? I made it to the living room, heart pounding, the muffled thudding from the bedroom, a constant, terrifying rhythm in the background. My eyes darted towards the front door, the locks I'd checked earlier. Were they enough against that? Suddenly, I remembered the window, the guy at the window. Was he still there? Had he faded away completely? Was he watching this unfold? You know, it's funny the things that stick with you after. Well, after everything. I remember the exact pattern of the water stains on the ceiling tile above my head, the way the cheap plastic phone felt slick with sweat in my hand, the echo of my own voice sounding thin and reedy in the sudden, terrifying silence. The 911 operator, she had this calm, practiced voice, the kind they probably teach you for talking people off ledges or calming hysterics. The silence after Mark, the Mark beside me whispered, was deafening. All I could hear was the frantic thumping of my own heart against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to break free. Outside the door, the pacing stopped, replaced by a low, guttural breathing sound, heavy and deliberate like an animal catching its breath right before the pounce. It wasn't Mark's usual breathing. Mark snored sometimes, sure, but this was different, predatory. It hadn't always been like this, this nightmare-fuel existence. Just a few weeks before that call, before the scratching at the door and the impossible duplication, things were boringly normal. Mark and I had been roommates for almost 2 years. Shared apartments, split bills, argued about whose turn it was to take out the trash, typical stuff. Mark was, well, he was Mark. Predictable, reliable almost to a fault. After the movie comment, I started noticing other things. Tiny little inconsistencies, like static on a radio slowly getting louder. Mark, who religiously drank black coffee every single morning, had done since I met him, started asking if we had any cream. Not just once, but multiple times. When I reminded him he didn't use cream, he'd just shrug, look vaguely surprised, and say, "Oh, right, forgot." Who forgets how they take their coffee after years? Then there was the music. Morning it happened, the first truly impossible thing was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were trash days and Mark always took the bins out before leaving for work. Always. It was part of his unshakable routine. I was running late, scrambling to find my wallet when I saw him heading out the door, bin bags in hand. "See you tonight, man," he called back, his voice perfectly normal, perfectly Mark. He shut the door behind him. I heard his footsteps fade down the apartment hallway. The gaslighting, or what felt like gaslighting, started subtly after the shower incident. It wasn't just denial anymore. It was like Mark was actively rewriting our shared history, planting false memories, making me question my own perception. We'd be talking about something, say, a concert we went to last year. I'd mention how much we both hated the opening band, and Mark would frown, tilt his head slightly, and say, "What are you talking about, Alex? The opener was awesome." The moment that shattered any lingering hope of a rational explanation, the moment I knew something was fundamentally, terrifyingly broken, happened about a week after I started the journal. I was coming home late from grabbing some takeout, juggling the food containers and my keys. As I walked up the path to our ground floor apartment, I glanced through the living room window. The lights were on, and there was Mark. After the window incident, the thin veneer of normalcy I'd been clinging to just dissolved. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't rationalize it away as stress or tiredness. Something was profoundly wrong with Mark, or with my perception of reality, or maybe both. I had to try and talk to him properly this time. No more beating around the bush, no more accepting his easy denials. It was a few days after the failed confrontation. I was trying my best to act normal, to pretend I believed his stress explanation, but inside I was a wreck. I started watching him constantly, looking for any slip-up, any crack in the facade, and I found one. It was small, almost laughably insignificant, but it was physical, concrete. Mark had this scar, a thin white line on the back of his left hand, just below the knuckles. Seeing the scar on the wrong hand changed everything. The unease morphed into genuine, gut-wrenching fear. I stopped trying to engage with Mark beyond the absolute minimum necessary. Polite mornings, brief answers to direct questions, nothing more. I started eating meals in my room, door locked. I found excuses to stay out late, working late, meeting friends, even when I wasn't, just walking around the city until I was too exhausted to think straight. The mirror incident. That's when I truly started to question my own sanity, to wonder if I was the one coming undone. It was late, maybe 2 in the morning. I couldn't sleep, the silence of the apartment pressing in on me. I crept out of my room to use the bathroom, moving as quietly as possible. The hallway light was off, only the faint glow from the streetlights outside filtering through the living room window. After the mirror incident, the Mark I interacted with, the one who seemed to be present most often, the one with the scar on the wrong hand, started to change more noticeably. The attempts at normalcy, the gaslighting disguised as concern, began to fade. He became colder, more distant. The blankness I'd seen occasionally in his eyes became his default expression. He'd still talk, but his voice was often flat, monotone, lacking the usual inflections and energy. I couldn't take it anymore. The constant fear, the paranoia, The feeling of being watched by something inhuman wearing my friend's skin. I had to get out. Not just for a few hours, but permanently. I waited until I was sure Mark, the cold Mark, was out, supposedly at work. His car was gone from the parking lot at least. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I threw clothes, my laptop, toiletries, anything essential into a duffel bag. After he stopped me from leaving, the atmosphere in the apartment became almost unbearable. I retreated back to my room, defeated, locking the door behind me. I felt like a prisoner. A day or two later, desperation clawing at me, I risked venturing out when I was sure cold Mark was asleep, or pretending to be. His door was closed, no light underneath. I noticed his phone lying on the small table near the front door, where he sometimes left it charging. The discovery on the phone pushed my paranoia into overdrive. I felt watched constantly, not just by cold Mark, but by unseen forces, the mysterious texter, whoever they were. A few nights later, the tension finally snapped in a way I could never have predicted. I was in the living room pretending to read, but really just trying to gauge cold Mark's mood. He was sitting in his usual armchair, unnervingly still, staring at the blank TV screen. Suddenly, we heard it. Seeing the frightened Mark hiding in my room, seeing the cold Mark's blatant denial, it broke something in me. The fear didn't lessen, but it was now mixed with a desperate, frantic energy. I wasn't just scared of Mark anymore. I was potentially scared for him too, or at least for the version of him that looked so terrified. Were they both victims? Or was one manipulating the other? Or was frightened Mark just another trick, another layer to this psychological torture? The breaking point came faster than I could have imagined. It was the middle of the night, deep, suffocating silence, the kind that presses in on your eardrums. I was jolted awake not by a noise, but by a feeling, a sense of presence in the room. My eyes snapped open. Standing at the foot of my bed, silhouetted against the faint light filtering through the blinds from the street lamp outside, was a figure, tall, still, watching me. It was Mark, but which one? In the near darkness, I couldn't tell. My fingers finally found the emergency call button on my phone screen, the familiar 3 digits glowing like a beacon in the terrifying darkness. 911. I stabbed at the screen, my thumb shaking so badly I almost missed the last digit. As the call connected, the bedroom door swung fully open. Standing there, silhouetted against the dim light from the hallway, was Mark, cold Mark, but he looked different somehow, taller maybe. His shoulders seemed broader, and his eyes. The operator was still talking, asking me to describe the intruder, her voice a lifeline I desperately clung to. He looks like Mark, I stammered, my eyes locked on the glowing eyes of the figure before me. Mid-20s, dark hair, blue shirt, but it's not him. The scar is on the wrong hand. And his eyes. How do you describe glowing eyes to a 911 operator without sounding completely unhinged? What happened next is fragmented, like watching a corrupted video file. I remember the flashing blue and red lights painting the walls through the blinds, the sudden, urgent shouting from outside the apartment. I remember cold Mark hesitating, his glowing eyes flickering towards the window, the cruel smile vanishing, replaced by something calculating. He wasn't scared, just inconvenienced. The heavy presence in the hallway, the chuckling thing, seemed to just dissolve like smoke.